All right, so a pleasant good afternoon to everyone. Pleasant good afternoon. And today we'll be looking at the sensory system. Everybody is seeing the slides, yes?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
A lovely pretty in pink. All right. You all seen the arrow as well?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Let's go. So we'll be looking now at the sensory system. And when we think about sensory system, how many senses do we have? Normal people, that is. How many senses?
5.
5.
And what are these senses?
Hearing. Sight, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling.
Right. Those are the 5. Some people might argue that there's a 6th sense that some people have, and indeed mothers seem to be born with it. I have a colleague who is a neuroscientist over at Emory University in Atlanta, and he's actually doing research on the pineal gland. You know, oftentimes, particularly in Indian art, you know how they put like a third eye in the center of the head? I don't know if you all have ever seen that.
Yes, sir.
Particularly in Hindu artwork. Well, it so happened that the pineal gland is actually located in that very same area, and he's doing research on it. If I happen to catch him before the end of the term, I might have a Zoom class where you all could talk with him, you know, and ask him about his research on that. But yeah, but it's something that's very true in terms of that pineal gland being able to give you that extra sensory perception, according to some chapters in biology. In terms of the conventional literature, it would tell you, however, there are 5 senses, and these 5 senses: sight, hearing, equilibrium, smell, and taste. Let's start with the eye. So the eye, dominant because we are visionary persons. Approximately 70% of all the information that we get comes through receptors in the eye. In terms of protection, well, it is enclosed in a bony orbit and it is cushioned by fat. We also have our lashes and eyebrows, which also offer protection from sweat coming down on the face and also from any dust. It does give a little bit of protection from dust in terms of entry into the eye itself. So the eyebrow, not only does it prevent sweat, but it also gives a bit of a shade. And the eyelid, it lubricates the eye by blinking. Let's look at some of the structures. The conjunctiva. This lines the eyelids and the anterior surface of the eyeball. So the conjunctiva, this is the region here, and we might be familiar with this situation in which the conjunctiva is inflamed. And inflammation related to the conjunctiva, what ailment or disease is that referred to as? It's a kind of itis.
Conjunctivitis.
There you go, right? Although sometimes known pink eye by pink eye or red eye. So another accessory structure relates to the lacrimal apparatus. And this is shown here. It consists of the gland, the sac, the canaliculi, and the duct itself. Very important in terms of the duct. This drains excess fluid, and this goes down into the nasal cavity, which is why oftentimes when you're crying, when you see like a little baby crying, you know, what happens? You know, they get a little snotty nose. The reason why? Because of the fact that the liquid from the eye is actually draining down through that duct and stimulating the formation of a little watery mucus. That is why they get a runny nose when they're often crying, little babies in particular. Let's talk about that moving of the eye, the movement. The extrinsic eye, there are certain muscles associated with the eye itself. And these cause the movement of the eye in different directions. The lateral movement outwardly, controlled by the lateral rectus, the medial inwardly, and the inferior and superior downward and outward respectively. So these eyes, these muscles are associated with movements of the eye itself. Sometimes you do have some issues relating to these muscles, and what we could have is certain persons having their eyes not particularly well focused. What is that condition known as? Pardon?
It's a lazy eye. I
A
don't know.
lazy eye, yes, right? And so lazy eye, and is also known as strabismus in terms of, well, it could have a lazy eye in which the eye actually follows. Strabismus refers to cross eye, what we call cross eye, you know, in terms of they're looking at you, but the eye is not particularly focused on you. Like one eye might be focused and one eye is a little off. So for the purpose of this course, that one is the main one to take note of, strabismus, in terms of that condition. All right, so the eye, what makes up the eye? So the eye consists of 3 layers: the fibrous, vascular, and the sensory or deep layer. Let's have a look at the fibrous layer. So the fibrous layer, one in terms of the eye itself, it is the outermost layer, and it consists of the sclera, this area here, which gives the eyes its shape, and the cornea. So this is the big to the front, and this allows the light to enter. So we have both the sclera and the choroid. These are the fibrous areas, fibrous outer layer. Then you have the middle layer. The middle layer, this is vascular and consists of the choroid, ciliary body, and the iris itself. So this is the iris here. What gives the eyes its color? Is it the iris? What is it that gives the eye its color?
The pupil, sir.
The pupil. Okay, somebody said pupil. Anybody else? What? So you know, if you have brown eyes or blue eyes, so what is that part of the eye that actually give it its color?
The iris.
And the answer is indeed iris. How would we remember that? But I applaud you for actually being so brave as to give that response. So thank you very much for that response. But the iris is the part that gives it. How could we remember that iris? Could you think of a way for us to remember that iris and color? How could we make that connection? Anybody?
Iridescence.
Iridescence, I like that. So iridescence, that means like shining or radiating of color, right? Anybody else? To think of a way to link iris with color of the eye? Iris. Iris, sound like your wrist. What is it about your wrist? Could be associated with color. I guess iridescence is the best one, right? That's a bit, but iridescence, you know, in terms of shiny, reflecting object. All right, let's go forward. The inner layer. Inner layer, this is the sensory layer, and it's the retina. Consists of specific sensory cells, cones, which handle color, and rods. They are responsible for detecting shades of gray and dim light. All right, so these 2 layers, very important, and you also have nerves present in the eye itself. So there are certain instances when persons have what is known as red-green color blindness. And when they have red-green color blindness, they have difficulty in picking out green color against a red background. So if persons looking at this, if you have red-green color, you wouldn't see any numbers. But if you do, you'll see a particular number. Which number is it?
15.
15, correct, is right. And if you do have, you know, color blindness, you wouldn't see it. I always remember, much to the surprise of his colleagues, one of my friends, when we were writing like CSEC exams in Form 5, chemistry lab. So it had an experiment where there was a color change. I think copper sulfate, going from copper 2 to copper 1. So it's a blue to red change. And sometimes copper sulfate, it could be greenish blue, depending on the dilution. Anyhow, so during the exam, so my friend went to the examiner to announce that he was colorblind. So he couldn't see, you know, the color change. So he didn't know if the change occurred or not. But what was strange is, I mean, we never knew up until that point. And I do believe I don't think he was pulling anything, you know, but just goes to show sometimes you have strange responses at strange times. Let's go forward. Color blindness, ability, you've lost that ability to distinguish between red-green when specifically relating to red-green color blindness. We looked at the parts of the eye. Looked at the layers. Now let's look at the posterior, or the back part of the eye, and the anterior segment. Now it contains two humors. Now, notice this humor here is H-U-M-O-R and not H-U-M-O-U-R. H-U-M-O-U-R means ha 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 ha. But H-U-M-O-R, back in the day, when they couldn't identify certain things, they would just call it a humor, right? So for instance, there was air. They knew it was there, but they couldn't identify it, so they call that a humor, right? So similarly with the eye, there's a clear liquid there, but they wasn't quite sure what it was. So they call them respectively the aqueous and the vitreous humor. The aqueous humor, this is one of the more watery parts of the eye, and the vitreous, this is one kind of like soft, shiny coconut jelly. You know, soft is vitreous. It supports the eyeball and it keeps the retina in place. So the aqueous and the vitreous humor. The lens, biconcave suspended, is attached to the ciliary body, and it's a refractory structure. What does refractory means? When you hear the word refractory, it refers to a word that begins with B in terms of what is done to light. What happens to light when it is refracted? It bounces, that is true. It bounces, and when it bounces, what happens to it in terms of its trajectory? If it's going straight, what would happen to it?
It will bend. I don't
Bent
know.
is the word. Excellent. You hit the nail on the head there, Colleen. And that was the word we look at. It bends it. So refractory just simply means it's bent. It bends the eye. And it's important that you bend the light so that it is concentrated on a specific part of the retina, which we'll look at just now. So lens, refractory, has that ability to bend the light and concentrate it on the part of the eye necessary for vision to be detected. There's a condition when the lens is removed, particularly with older persons. What is that condition known as? It begins with C, and they replace the lens. It doesn't make sense. I teach, you all know everything. Very good, Colleen, right? So when persons have cataract, this lens becomes cloudy. And what they literally do, they go in, they make an incision, and they take out the lens, and they put in an artificial lens. And that's one, so it's incredible because if left unchecked, cataracts could lead to blindness because it's cloudy. Think about it. Imagine you're walking wrong and somebody smear like Vaseline on your glasses, right? You can't see. But now, in terms of replacing it with an artificial lens, you now have that ability to actually see. Yeah, so that's really grand. So this is just showing the structures of the eyes, what we looked at. What part of the eye is responsible for color again? I forget. Iridescence. Talk to me.
Iris.
The iris. Iris, that's the part. So when you look at somebody, you see they have brown eyes, they have black eyes or blue eyes. That is referred to as the iris. Most people, what is the most common color of eyes? So with many people, is it brown eyes or black eyes?
Brown.
And Marian is showing us her eyes. Yes, brown. Black eyes is actually very rare. Very, very rare. Most people, even though your eye might look very dark, I might look black. If you go up to the mirror and take a really good look, shine a light from the side, you'll probably see it's brown. But having black eyes is very uncommon, you know? So if you do have it, well, hey, you know, props to you. Let's go forward. So in terms of the pathway of light, it comes in, it is refracted, or bent by the cornea. That is initially it's bent, and then it's also bent. So it passes through the iris. It is bent more so by the lens. And the lens, right, you have the ciliary muscle, and these ciliary muscles have the ability to move or change the thickness of the lens. And then based on that, the image is now focused on the back of the eye, gives the fovea centralis, right? So very importantly, in terms of the bending, this is ideally where you'd want the image to form. This is why you have to bend this light, because if not, the light will go all over the place and you wouldn't be able to see it very clearly. All right. So the lens, the ability of the eye to adjust the focal length of the lens, that is known by a particular word. It's a definition in terms of the eye, the ability of the lens to adjust its focal length. And it's a long word, it begins with A, and it's something related to the hotel industry. in terms of when they take in people, they say they are something them.
Accommodating.
It doesn't make
Admit.
sense. It doesn't make sense. I hear admitting would have been a suitable response, yes. But just in terms of how they define it, they didn't use the word admittance, even though they could have, but they chose the word accommodation instead. So the word, so do take note of that as it relates to the eye itself. Accommodation is the ability of the eye to adjust the focal length of the lens. Long story short, it means then that the eye could move this, can either thicken it or thin it, such that the image could be brought into focus, ideally on the fovea to the back of the eye. Now, what cranial nerve is associated with the eye? Anybody wants to hazard a
The
guess?
occipital, sir.
The optic nerve. Now, I hear what you're saying. No, you're right. Actually, this is a vague question. That's a very, that's a very good response. In terms of movement, would be the occipital. So actually, if you put that as a response based on this question, you could have argued it and you could have gotten it right. But what it is really wanted to say specifically with this one, what nerve is associated with the eye and is responsible for sight? That should have been added on, but I'm glad you said occipital because that one is responsible for movement of the eye. You're not wrong at all. Glad you said it. Which nerve innervates the external muscles of the eye? Well, there are three of them: the oculomotor, the trochlea, and the abducens, which are nerves 3, 4, and 6. Those are responsible for movement. Very good. Let's talk about the air. Which one we're going to talk about? So what's the next thing we're going to talk about?
The air.
Same like hearing.
What? What are we going to talk
Hearing.
about? The air? Okay,
Oh,
we're going to talk
hearing,
about...
so
Yeah, yes, we're going to talk about the air. So the air, something that is very important, responsible for two things, both hearing and balance. And it has three major areas: external, middle, and internal. What we're looking at here, is this the external, middle, or internal part of the air?
external.
External, very good, yeah. This is the external part of the air, where some people adorn with rings, earrings, and so on, right? Or the more adventurous ones might want to put tattoos on it as well. So this is the external part of the air. This is the middle. The middle is the part just before the eardrum. Then we have, sorry, this is the external. The middle contains the bones, the stapes, and beyond that is the internal air. Let's have a look. So this is the external. It goes up to our eardrum. And what do we have here? It's lined by particular cells, ceruminous cells, and they secrete cerumen. What's another name for cerumen? Something that we have
I'm
inside.
watching the area wax.
Wax, yeah? Yeah, this is the external. I like how you're thinking in terms of watching and deducing. So it produces wax. Now, what is the best way to get wax out of your ears? Take whatever you have and juke it down your ears?
No, they say put almond oil.
Almond oil, okay. But do you know, interestingly enough, you know your ears are self-cleaning? I know some people are aware of that. It's clean itself.
I'm supposed
So, but when you go by the doctor, he just when he have to do one assessment to look down in the air, he tell you it's full of wax.
I was not going to qualify the statement. There's some persons who actually have issues with wax. I remember one of your colleagues from a number of years ago. In fact, he said he was losing his hearing. You know, he recognized that. And when he went to the ENT specialist, yeah, they found that, you know, it was full of wax. So, of course, they had to use saline solution and flush it out. And when they flush it out, boom, guess what is here in return, you know? So there's some persons it doesn't work for. Not everybody it works for. But naturally, your ears are self-cleaning. What do I mean by that? You know, in your motion and in your sleeping, it actually cleans itself and the wax falls out. Right? So you might get up, sometimes, you know, you pass your finger on the outside of the ear, particularly in this region, right here, and you know, you find like dry bits of wax. So for most people, it's like that, but for some people, it does accumulate. So you would have to clean it out periodically. Yeah, go ahead.
But nothing beats the feeler, not just chicken and
You understand? Isn't it a refresh? And you know, like when you push it down, like one eye will close and your mouth is open out, and you start to shake your head. Huh?
You're still going conventional. Give me a hairpin and I good to go.
You know, a
Yes,
hairpin,
hairpin,
a
yeah.
key, any kind of key,
Or a nice
a
long
swab,
nail.
a pen, you know, but everything in moderation, and do be careful when you do push things down in your ear, yeah? Right, because you don't want to rupture this eardrum, right? And if it does, you know, a surgical intervention would come in. So ideally, you'd want to leave it alone. But if you do feel, yeah, I know, nothing like really, you feel this sensation in your ear. And sometimes if you have nothing at hand, you take your little finger, because that's the smallest one, and you juke it down and you're spinning it and trying your best, right? But do be careful when you do that, because of the fact you run the risk, you know, of damage. But always be careful when you do that. Anybody ever had a little insect go into their ear, or knew of somebody, or and sometimes it does happen, particularly with children, like a little ant or a little cockroach or something walk down in the
And then
air,
mosquitoes.
mosquito, and it not coming out. So what you had to do in a case like that? What's the best thing to do?
Go by the doctor, but in my case, we didn't go on by the doctor. I just take some saline and flush it out.
There
and
you
it's
go.
cool.
That's the best thing to do. Saline. I have to double check with mentholated spirits. I can understand the logic because it does vaporize ultimately, but it is lethal to the insect itself. I think that's another way. So if you have mentholated spirit, you could pour it down. You don't run the risk of it going down into your brains because of the fact you do have an eardrum. Right? So that's another thing in terms of putting some type of spirit which has alcohol, or even like alcohol for that matter, you know, to pour down a rum or something like that. It will kill the insect. All right. And yes, go ahead.
So looking at the structure, right? Seeing where you have the line that points in at the eardrum. It have a canal going to the top. There's like a line or a channel going to the top.
Good question. No. So this is sealed off. So the middle, this is where the middle layer begins, but it's sealed off. Sorry, we couldn't see it in 3D, but that's a very good question. So it's like a wall, right?
So the reason why I'm asking, right? Because you know, so like when I go to the beach and you know water gets
the eustachian tube you're thinking about?
Yeah, wondering
where's the eustachian tube? That's a very good question, and we'll see it. That's a very good question. The eustachian tube, there's it down here. It's from the middle. Is this? I want to say this is it here. The eustachian is from the middle air going down. And when you blow, you're talking about like if water going here and you blow and you feel it clearing up.
Yeah, so like if you go up high, like
right,
and you just feel the air.
So what happens, this membrane, remember, it could move. It's not like a wall, like solid or bone, but it's flexible. It's tympanic membrane, hence the reason they call it a membrane. So when you blow, what you're actually doing, right, you're making the pressure, you're equalizing the pressure in the inner air to that inside of the nasal cavity, which is why you blow. So if you do have any, sometimes you could have a bit of a blockage here. It clears it out from mucus or otherwise, right? It clears it out, but you're equalizing the pressure in here. And with that is in your nasal cavity, because this goes down to the nasal cavity itself. And when you do that, you know, your hair is like your air pops and it clears it out and you get that ease. Other than that, you know, it could be, particularly when you're flying, you know, you get this, it's a kind of funny sensation. And that has to do with a pressure differential between the pressure in here and the pressure in your nasal cavity. So to equilibrate, to make the both areas equal, right, you blow it out. And it, if needed, air will rush up. And so you have a clear flow of air and it equilibrates the pressures in here, and to that is in your nasal cavity, which matches the external environment. Yeah, but that's a good question. So it's not from the external air, but it's in the middle air that you have that issue occurring. That's a very good question. All right, so so we mentioned here, this is where you have the cells, this is where you have your wax, and up to the eardrum, that is where the outer air ends. Then you have the middle air. It contains these bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, hammer, anvil, and the stirrup. Which one is the smallest one out of those three, you think? If you had to make a guess, which one do you think is the smallest of those bones?
I would say the stapes, I think.
The stapes.
Just now, I said.
And you're right. Yeah, you're right. It is the stapes. Quite correct. Right? Because looking at it physically. And a little
I was
FYI,
doing this nonsense in exams too, you know.
yeah,
Doubt myself.
you doubt yourself. You know,
Yeah.
statistically, it has been shown when you usually, you know, with MCQs, you know, the first answer is usually right. You know, they've done it. So whenever you see a choose answer, yeah, it's usually the right one. And you're quite right. And a little FYI, this is the smallest bone in the body. All right? Smallest bone, a little trivia question. You know, what is the smallest bone in the body? Is this one, the stapes. And how small is it? I know that's what you're asking. Well, it's about 3 millimeters by 2.5 millimeters. So imagine, remember, we spoke about the millimeter. If you put your thumb and forefinger together, pull it apart, you're now seeing light as a millimeter. Imagine just 3 of those little spaces. And that's the size of that. That's really small, but it is so critical. Yeah, very, very critical. If something goes wrong with it, you would lose your sense of hearing, or you could have significant damage to it. Yeah, good. So that's the malleus, incus, and the stapes. Those are the 3 bones of the inner ear, very important in terms of hearing. The internal ear, so we went past, note the middle ear between the tympanic membrane and the round and oval window. So this part here is the middle. Now the inner ear is the part beyond that, the labyrinth in terms of the bony and membranous vestibule, the semicircular canals, which deal with equilibrium, and most critically, the cochlea, dealing with hearing. One of the things we have to appreciate with our sensory system is this. Does sound actually go to the brain? If I were to ask you that question, and I want you to think about it, just give me 1 minute, but just answer that question. See if you can think about that. Does sound go directly to the brain?
So you're sounding low.
The sound go directly to the brain. So that's the question. Think about it for 2 minutes. I'll be right back. Okay. All right.
What are you thinking? I thinking no, guys, because I
Yes,
think
it does.
direct.
It does.
All right.
Zoom recording. All right. So great. So let me see. Oh, sorry to interrupt you there. I know you were mid sentence, but let's see if we can address this question real quick. So, does sound go directly to your brain? How would you answer that question? Let me hear you.
And it's Jamila who answered this question.
This is open to the floor. Anybody answering it?
Jamila has the answer, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I believe so. So we'll verify. So I'll say I believe so because it goes to the temporal part of the brain, and that is the area that processes.
Right. So does
sound.
okay, gotcha. So you're quite right in terms of that area that processes the sound. But how does the sound travel directly to the temporal part?
So
and the answer is no, it doesn't. It doesn't. No. One of these. Go ahead.
It's actually on the slide right now where the waves are transformed to nerve impulses.
One of the things to appreciate with everything relating to the brain, you have to appreciate this. The brain only recognizes what? Nerve impulses. That's it. Nothing else. You know? So think about it. Bzz, 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 bzz. That's what it recognizes. Would it recognize la 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 la? I have no idea what is that. It's like, what is that? I have no idea what is that. Bzz, 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 bzz. In terms of electric, yes, it recognizes that. And the same thing for everything relating to sight, relating to sound, relating to taste, everything. When you're looking at taste, what happens? You have these receptors that recognizes different chemical signals present in the food. When it binds to those receptors, it generates an action potential, which is then sent along to the brain. And that's how the brain recognizes it. It does a comparison with our memory in our cerebral hemispheres, and it identifies what it is. That's how we know we eating mango chow, chicken and chip, KFC. Not only do we taste it, but we have to do a comparison in terms of memory. So if you didn't have a memory, you wouldn't have no idea what you're eating. You're eating chicken and chips and you're saying, why is this boy mango? Because you have nothing to compare it to. But the only thing, very important, that the brain recognizes is electrical impulses. That is something that when we're looking at this, just be mindful of that. So in terms of the air, yeah, you're right. So the air comes in, these are pressure waves. It causes the eardrum to vibrate. When it vibrates, what it does, it hits the bones, right? So it first hits the malleus, then the malleus hits the incus hits the stapes, right? Now this vibrates against what? This oval window here. Then this sets up movement in the cochlea, and the cochlea now displaces some of these structures within it. And when they move, attached to them, it has stretch receptors that generate action potential. So when they move, stretch receptors move, it generates an action potential, which is then sent along the auditory nerve to the brain. But the key is sound is not sent when we smell something. So there's the funny part when you think about the brain. When you smell something, technically you're not really smelling anything. You know, you're perceiving things, but what you perceive is really the electrical impulse going to your brain. Okay? All right. So just let that marinate for a second. I'll be right back. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. All right. So when you think about it, it's weird. When we hear something, it's really electrical impulses. It's really a perception. When we eat something, yum, 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 right? That taste is really electrical impulses. When we smell something, electrical impulses, right? The odoriferous molecules, they bind to a receptor, right? It opens sodium channels. Sodium rushes in, generating an action potential that goes up to the brain. And the brain recognizes bzz, 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 bzz. That's what jam smell like. Bzz, 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 bzz. Yeah, that's what pepper smell like, you know? And the same thing relates to taste, relates to sight, electrical impulses. But no actual image goes to the brain in terms of sight. With smell, no actual scent goes up to the brain. Nothing like that. The only thing the brain recognizes, nerve impulses. Interesting, yes?
Very.
Interesting concept. So therefore, if you get a good lash in your head, you could start to taste govas, possibly. You know?
Sir,
Yes?
so it's a hearing aid, right? Like, when I first finished the hearing aid is supposed to like replicate the bones in the ear.
That's a good question. I don't know. Not my area of specialties. I can't read. So I don't know. I know some of them amplify the sound. Now, in the amplification, it depends on what type of hearing loss you have, because there are different types of hearing aid. But to be honest, I really can't speak to that. It's outside of my specialty area, and I'll be walking on the eggshells in terms of doing that, right? But that's a good question. It all depends on what type of hearing loss. Some people have hearing loss related to the cochlea. Some have it related to the bones of the inner ear itself. So I can't comment on that, but that's a good question. I'll see if I can do some research on it. Hit me up on WhatsApp and I'll respond to it, okay? But that's a very good question.
Okay, sir.
All right, no problem. Okay. So this is just showing the cochlea, right? So in terms of the hair, These are the fibers that are present in the cochlea itself. And very interesting with the semicircular canals. Let's talk about that. So how do you know where in terms of perception wise, where you are in space? Well, you have these structures here. And when you move in a particular direction, you have it's fluid filled. So the fluid moves, and as it moves these structures, and the copula moves in a particular direction. Now attached to the copula, you have these hair cells. So as they move, some pull on the others. Some will be pulled more depending on how the wave is actually set up. And based on that, electrical impulses are sent to the brain, and you could perceive then which direction you're moving in based on that. Based on these movements, so as they move, they generate action potentials that actually travel to the brain and lets the brain know where it is in space. And interestingly, the brain then coordinates that with what it's seeing with your eyes to actually make sense of everything. Again, this is something that is learned over a period of time, which is why you might find with babies when they're now born, newborns, they're always kind of looking confused all the time. They're trying to put things in perspective, but they usually get it right after a while. And they coordinate all of these things where that is concerned. Might spin a student and ask them to walk. This actually is just riddled with liability and lawsuits. So I wouldn't ask you to do that. Too much liability associated with that. And I wouldn't ask you to do that to any of your friends or family members. That's just a lawsuit waiting to happen if it does happen. But if you do it, when you do spin somebody, they become disoriented because once you stop, that fluid in the endolymph, it continues to move. And therefore, the sensation of movement continues because of the fact fluid filled is pulling on those hair cells and those sensations are sent to the brain. So it's a bit of a conflict because your eyes is telling you, I'm not moving, but you're getting these sensory impulses, which you're accustomed coordinating. You coordinate the motion with what you're seeing with the eye, but now you're in a bit of conflict. So therefore, what happens? The brain says, you know what? Override, we'll call this situation giddy. And it throws in giddy. And what happens to you? Well, you know what happens when you're giddy. So what happens if I drink? Why do I feel giddy? Somebody was going to ask that question. Clearly, in terms then, go ahead.
I just want to cerebellum.
What was it? Full question, if you don't mind.
No, sir. I was just saying the cerebellum. It was off. So I wasn't actually saying something. You just asked about giddiness and alcohol or whatever, and I just said cerebellum.
Now, interestingly, that feeling you get of giddiness is more related to dehydration. Alcohol, actually, even though you might imbibe quite a bit, it causes you to urinate a lot. And in so doing, it draws a lot of water out of you. So you have this feeling of dehydration. And when you're dehydrated, things go out of whack. Why is it that things go out of whack when you're dehydrated? One, physiologically, in terms of urination, salts follow water. That is something that happens physiologically. When you urinate a lot of salt is actually leaves the body via the urine. Now, salt, why is salt necessary? Is it important as it relates to the nervous system? It is critical. Salts are the foundation of nervous impulses, the initiation of nervous impulses. You need sodium ions to generate action potentials. So when you lose a lot of water via dehydration, when you do drink alcohol, you're losing salt. So therefore, what happens? You have trouble in terms of properly coordinating muscular action. And that translates into the rather interesting way in which you walk. And some persons can identify with that when you drink too much.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
As far as the liquid that is in that area, does that affect, can that be linked to why people experience vertigo? Like, sometimes they'll tell you to sit backward and basically elevate your feet and lean backward. That has something to do with the inner ear.
That's a very good question you asked there. Now, vertigo, right, is a sensation you have that for some people have it, right, that everything is spinning or moving. Now, it's a condition. I do know with some persons, they say it's a psychological issue. So they go to therapy in terms of a psychologist or a psychiatrist in terms of finding the root cause to see if they could correct it. But you have this sensation of falling all the time. So I could understand why somebody will tell you to sit down and elevate your legs. Makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't want somebody who's experiencing this vertigo symptom to actually be walking around because they could fall. Imagine you're walking on a normal surface, but you're getting this sensation of everything spinning around you, you'll fall. So when you're getting these attacks, I could understand why somebody will tell you to sit and raise your legs. But insofar as I know, it's a psychological condition in terms of vertigo. Does it then involve directly the actual movement? As far as I know, it doesn't. It doesn't actually physically involve the movement of the fluid in the inner ear. But what is happening is you're getting that sensation. And it has been linked to a psychological, you could probably call it wiring issue within the body, for want of a better term. All right. But some people do suffer from it. And I can understand why when you do have these attacks, why they will tell you to sit down, because you really wouldn't want somebody to walk like that. They can harm themselves, they could fall. Yeah. So back to you're relating it to this in terms of spinning a student. This is just something that is temporary. Because eventually, of course, the spinning sensation within the inner ear, it will stop, right? But if you do try it, after you spin somebody and you stop them, the fluid is still moving, you'll have that sensation. So this one is temporary. With vertigo, I know they do have these attacks with persons, they have these attacks, and during those times, it's a little tricky in terms of them to operate properly. Yeah? That's a very good question you asked there.
Reason because one of my family members experienced it once. It was really scary because like she literally couldn't stand up for very long.
Yeah. Because and everything would probably be going okay, and then all of a sudden you're seeing him or her putting out their hands and starting to, sway from side to side because they're having the.
Never happened again after that. It just happened at one time and never again. So it was very
strange. Yeah. One of the things within the sphere of medicine, within the sphere of science, the more we know, the more we realize what we don't know concerning the body. And there are lots of things medically and otherwise which we can't explain, and when certain issues arise, like the one, for instance, which you just outlined, we just don't know. Medicine doesn't always have the answers for everything. And we have to recognize our limitation as scientists, as medical practitioners, that we don't know everything. However, we do try to operate within the sphere of things, what we do know, and try to apply those laws to what we don't know. But not every time it works. For example, take in the situation you just pointed out, a one-off. Why did it happen just one-off? We don't know. Does it mean it didn't happen? Absolutely not. It means it did happen. It's just that we don't have an explanation for it. So that's a very good question. I'm glad you brought it up. So let's get back to our good friend, the air. Outer, enter the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. Middle, from the tympanic membrane over to the oval window. And this is the eustachian tube. This is the one that goes down into the nasal cavity, as we mentioned, equalizing pressure, particularly if you're traveling and you go up in planes, you get this stuffiness. And that is because of mismatched pressure in the nasal cavity, the external environment, and the air. So blowing, actually, sometimes it could have a clogged mucus or otherwise in the eustachian tube. Blowing actually clears it such that the air comes up and you have that equalization of pressure, and it takes away that stuffiness feeling. Inner air consists of the cochlea and the cochlear nerve. Motion actually stimulates or causes the generation of action potential, which then travels along the cochlear nerve to the brain. And similarly, the movement stretches the cells within the semicircular canal, generating action potentials, which are sent on the vestibular nerve to the brain, and is now perceived as movement, perceived as sound in the case of the cochlear nerve. So which one is associated with hearing and equilibrium? I'll give you a hint. It has the word cochlea in it. Very good. Cranial nerve 8, the vestibular cochlear nerve. Let's talk about taste and smell. Somebody talk to me about taste and smell. What happens when you have a cold? Does it affect your taste?
Yes, sir.
What does that tell you about taste and smell then?
That they are connected.
Beautiful. Yeah, spot on, spot on. Some things are not complicated in life. Nose and taste. So smell and taste, they go hand in hand, like hand in glove. Left and right, up and down, peanut and butter, they go together. So the nose, responsible for the olfactory sense. And we talk about olfactory relating to smell. And we have that ability to distinguish odors. How we have that ability, we detect them and then we check our library of smells, and now we do a comparison and we say, ah, that smells like mango. Ah, that smells like chenet. Ah, that smells like guava. That's how we're able to detect it. Let's see what happens when we smell. The scents come in, and we have these receptors located in the nasal cavity, the roof of the nasal cavity. And they replace every 30 to 60 days. These cells are bipolar neurons. So when the chemicals come in, they bind to these particular cells, and these cells generate action potentials. So what you would have happening in this case, the action potentials are generated and they pass along the olfactory bulb, along the olfactory tract, and all the way to the specific part of the brain in which it is perceived, the smell. Here it is in a little more detail. This is the conchia, so-called because it looks like the inside of a conch shell. And the smell comes in. The cribriform plate, this is where you have the sensory cells, the olfactory sensory cells. They're located in this cribriform plate. You have binding, generation of the action potentials, travel along the olfactory nerve up until the brain, where it is perceived as a particular smell. The tongue, you have taste buds, right, going in the oral cavity, along the cheeks, pharynx, which is to the back of the mouth, and the epiglottis on the tongue. Each contains about 50 to 100%. Now, take note, taste is really 80% smell. So that is why you smell something and you're about to taste it, sometime your mouth watering. Let me throw out a word for you. Tell me if your mouth starts to water. Cochlea. Tamarind sauce. Nothing? Doing nothing for you? No? Okay. For me, Cochlea, my mouth started water already, yeah? So sometimes certain smells, they could cause the salivation to occur. And why do you start to salivate when you smell certain things? That is because of what? You are something food. When you smell something and your mouth begins to salivate, why does that happen?
Again, ready for digestion?
Correct, is right. There's an expectation of food. So with your sublingual, submaxillary, the salivary gland begin to secrete because they have this expectation of food. So on the tongue, you have particular cells located at different areas. The circumvallate, the foliate, and the fungiform located at particular regions of the tongue itself. They have particular shapes associated with them. Circum, they're round. Foliate, they have lateral, located along the lateral walls, shown here. And the fungiform, located to the tip of the tongue, they are mushroom shaped. So on the tongue itself, right, what sensations do you have? Right, you have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. This is usually delicious and is usually associated with mushroom smells. Right? So the umami. Right?
So you should have called that thing on the screen their face.
Oh, cheesecake. Oh, run
Yes.
away from me, Satan, away from me. You know, with cheesecake, that's probably one. If you can't eat one piece, yeah. If
No,
somebody, for
sir.
instance, tell you, give you put a cheesecake and say, take a slice, I'm coming back just now. You foot eat halfway to the whole thing, yes? It's very convincing in terms of giving you that opportunity to eat a lot of cheesecake. It really does taste good. And what is it? It's a lot of sugar in there, right? Milk and cream cheese, but it really is really nice. And whatever jam they put on it.
So change the screen quick now.
You understand? For sure. And I'll do that. Right? So you have sweet, sour, salty, bitter. Umami gives you that mushroom taste. So all of these things occur in the mouth itself in terms of taste. You chew the food and it is then pushed to the back in terms of a bolus, in terms of the shape. You have a bolus shape that is pushed to the back of the mouth when you're swallowing. So it swallows, it goes down the esophagus, right? And then to the stomach where digestion could continue. Very interesting. This is the uvula, which is when you open your mouth. So this is it here. What do you think this uvula does in relation to the nasopharynx when you're swallowing? One word begins with C, ends in R, and you find it at the top of a Coca-Cola bottle.
Cork.
A cork, yeah. Well, I was thinking a cover, but cork will do.
Cover,
And it does the same thing, right? So what this uvula does, it covers it when you are swallowing, prevents things from going up into your nose. But what happens if somebody crack a joke? Right? You're drinking something, somebody crack a joke, this moves, and what happens? It goes up. And you ever were eating or drinking and somebody crack a joke and it comes through your nose? Never happened to anybody? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Right, that's because something went wrong with the uvula. So if you eat and come through your nose, what do you do when it comes through your nose? You wipe it off and then you put it back in your mouth. What kind of behavior is that? Always do that? No? No, you don't do that. Of course not. Right?
Right, do that.
You make sure nobody looking, and then you put it back in your mouth. Right? Okay. So of course we know we don't do that, right? But so that shows then the link between the oryngopharynx and the nasopharynx. The uvula it actually covers it when you're swallowing, which is why it's not a good idea to talk and eat at the same time. Gets confused, it moves, things could go up into your nose, as we're well aware, and could then come out through your nose where that is concerned. Areas of the brain now. So we looked at the front, we looked at the eye, right? We looked at the ear. We spoke about taste, sensation, and smell. Let's look at some of the areas of the cerebral cortex that control these things. Speech. There are two areas, Broca's and Broca's, and Wernicke. What do they do, Broca and Wernicke? And those are probably two very important. And one is concerned, they're both concerned with speech and comprehension. Which one is for comprehension? You know, if somebody is talking to you and you're understanding what they're saying. So for instance, if somebody's talking to you and say, stand up, which area governs that? Is it the Broca's area or the Wernicke's? For you to understand what is happening.
I think it's Wernicke.
And I think you're correct. And I think you're correct. You're very good. And Broca is speed. You're very good. Very good. 10 points. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. You're on top of your game today. Very good. So how would we remember that? If we do remember, for those of us who do Spanish, what's the word for mouth in Spanish?
Boca.
Boca. Yes, well done. So one way to remember it is like Broca, that is associated with speaking. So yes, understanding is Wernicke. Somebody telling you, stand up. Okay, you could do it, you could stand up. But somebody tell you, why is 1 + 1? And you say 2. Well, yes, you're understanding it, but the fact of you responding, that is Broca's area. All right. So we remember Broca and Boca. So when we hear Broca, we're talking about speech. Wernicke is the understanding. right? How do you remember Winnicky? Well, the letter W does look like two U's, yeah? So, you know, understanding is like, begins with a U. That's probably the best. So just know that, you know, it's one or the other, and broker and boca. Another way to remember it, Winnicky begins with W. When we want to find out some information on the web, where do we go to? It have a site that begins with W.
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, yeah, right? And that, when we go there, we suddenly understand everything. So that's another way to remember it, Winnicky and Wikipedia. We go to Wikipedia to understand certain things, whereas boca, just like broker area, just like the boca, that's where you speak or you talk. We good?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go. We're almost there. We have 6 slides again. What nerve is associated with the sense of smell?
So it's temporal. Oh, shucks.
In terms, not a new factory, but a
Olfactory.
olfactory or olfactory. Very good. I'd smell. What about taste? That's the one you're going for, the gustatory.
What the hell is this?
Pardon? Sorry?
I think I mic on by mistake or something.
Oh, okay.
I don't
Not an
think that
issue.
was first.
Hey,
I'll run a
lovely.
check. Not a problem. Not a problem. I'll run a mute check. Yeah, that's okay. It happens all the time. All right. So olfactory, smell. All right. The glossopharyngeal nerve. All right. Cranial nerve number 9. That's the one associated with the sense of taste. Glossopharyngeal. All right. Let's talk about the general senses now. We're down to the last set. What are the general senses? These include touch, pressure, temperature, pain, and proprioception. Proprioception is our ability to tell where we are in space, upright, upside down, and so on. So in the skin, what do we have? We have thermoreceptors, which can detect sense of heat or cold. We have Meissner's corpuscle and the Pacinian. The Meissner's help with the sense of touch. These are light touches, such as with a feather. Deep touch, we have Pacinian corpuscle, right, which sense pressure. We also have pain receptors, notwithstanding these to the Meissner's and the Pacinian. We have nociceptors or other nerve endings within the skin which detect pain. Very importantly as well, epidermis, dermis, these are showing the layers. And this is really, we looked at this earlier in the semester, the first couple of weeks, as it relates to the skin. Now, proprioception, the ability to tell our position in space. You have receptors located in the tendons, muscles, and joints. So stretch receptors, and depending on which ones stretch, it gives the brain a picture of what is happening. Now, note well, proprioception, this ability to tell if we're standing upright or not. This is something that is learned, which is why, again, with a baby, you will not see them standing up right away. They have not mastered the art of, okay, this is upright, or this is upside down, and this is lying down. They haven't mastered it just yet. So proprioception, notwithstanding the fact that you do have these receptors which are stretched, but a comparison with, okay, these are stretched, it sends a particular set of impulses to the brain, and that is perceived as, okay, upright, okay, lying to the left, lying to the right, up on your toes. All of these things are perceived by a comparison to memory. That's why memory is really important, okay? So today, what did we look at? We looked at all of the senses, the 5 particular senses in the brain, in the body itself, and the take-home message is this. Do remember that in terms of sight, smell, hearing, touch, and sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, the only thing that the brain recognizes from them is electrical impulses. So what happens? Either you have binding at a receptor. So let's say odoriferous molecule, in terms of the smell, it binds a receptor. That now, when you have binding, it opens a channel, allows sodium to rush in, generation of an action potential. And because of the intensity of the bind and the specific type of molecule, an electrical impulse is sent to the brain that is recognized as bzz, 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 jam, bzz, 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 curry chicken, bzz, 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 fry rice, bzz, bzz, jerk chicken with pepper and a green salad on the side. All of these things, only thing that is recognized is electrical impulses. Same goes true for sight, for hearing as well. Okay? Any questions?
So this not coming and talk to the exam, right? We know last week.
I find that to be